A first-class ticket, a designer outfit, and the condescending smirk of a pilot who thought he knew her worth. For Imani Reed, her flight on Apex Air was supposed to be a moment of quiet reflection, a reward for a lifetime of achievement. But when Captain Mark Sampson decided her vibrant, custom-made suit was a joke, he made the biggest mistake of his career. He saw a black woman in a colorful outfit and judged her. What he didn't see was the woman who owned a significant portion of his airline, a woman who was about to teach him a lesson in respect that would echo from the cockpit to the boardroom. This isn't just a story about a woman who was wronged. It's a story about the day a pilot's arrogance cost him everything, and a powerful woman reminded an entire airline who was really in charge. The hum of the exclusive first-class lounge at JFK was a familiar symphony to Imani Reed. It was a melody of clinking champagne glasses, the soft murmur of hushed conversations, and the gentle rustle of expensive fabrics. Imani, a woman whose presence commanded attention without her ever demanding it, sat gracefully in a plush armchair, her fingers tracing the rim of her untouched flute of cristal. She was dressed in a custom-made pantsuit of a vibrant sun-kissed yellow, the fabric a luxurious silk that shimmered with every subtle movement. The cut was impeccable, a testament to the Parisian couturier who had designed it just for her. A single magnificent amethyst brooch, a family heirloom, was pinned to her lapel, its deep purple a striking contrast to the sunny hue of her suit. Her hair was styled in elegant, intricate braids that cascaded over her shoulders, each one a work of art. Today was a day of quiet celebration for Imani. She had just successfully closed a multi-billion-dollar merger for her venture capital firm, a deal that had been months in the making. This flight to London was her reward, a chance to unwind before attending a series of high-profile board meetings. She was a woman who had built her empire from the ground up, a trailblazer in the cutthroat world of finance, and she had done it all with a quiet determination and an unyielding belief in her own worth. As the boarding announcement for Apex Air Flight 714 echoed through the lounge, Imani gathered her belongings, a sleek black leather briefcase and a vintage Hermes Kelly bag. She made her way to the gate, her posture exuding a confidence that was as natural to her as breathing. She presented her ticket to the gate agent, a polite young woman named Sarah, who greeted her with a warm smile. "Welcome aboard, Reed. We have you in seat 1A. I hope you have a pleasant flight." Imani returned the smile. "Thank you, Sarah. I'm sure I will." She stepped onto the jet bridge, the anticipation of a smooth and relaxing journey settling over her. As she entered the aircraft, she was greeted by a flight attendant who guided her to her seat. The first-class cabin was a haven of understated luxury, with spacious pods, fine wood finishes, and the soft glow of ambient lighting. Imani settled into her seat, the supple leather molding to her form. It was then that she saw him. Captain Mark Sampson stood at the entrance to the cockpit, his arms crossed over his chest, a smirk playing on his lips. He was a man who wore his authority like a second skin, his pilot's uniform crisp and perfectly tailored. His eyes, a cool, dismissive blue, swept over Imani, lingering on her vibrant yellow suit with an expression that was anything but appreciative. He then leaned over to his co-pilot, a younger man named David, and whispered something. David glanced at Imani, a flicker of discomfort in his eyes before he quickly looked away. Imani, a woman who had faced down hostile boardrooms and shrewd negotiators, was no stranger to judgmental stares. She had learned long ago that a black woman in a position of power was often a target for those who felt threatened by her very existence. But there was something about Captain Sampson's open derision that pricked at her composure. It was the casual, almost bored way he dismissed her, as if she were a piece of garish luggage that had been mistakenly loaded into the first-class cabin. He then sauntered over to her seat, his smirk widening into a condescending grin. "Well, well, well," he began, his voice laced with a mock joviality that set Imani's teeth on edge. "Aren't we a little bright for first class?" Imani met his gaze, her own expression unreadable. "I beg your pardon?" "Your outfit," he said, gesturing to her suit with a flick of his wrist. "It's quite the Statement. Most of our first-class passengers prefer a more subdued palate. You know, to blend in. Imani's voice was calm, but there was a steely edge to it that could have cut glass. And what exactly is it that you think I should be blending in with, Captain? The directness of her question seemed to momentarily throw him off. He had expected her to be flustered, perhaps even apologetic. But Imani was neither. She was a woman who had never apologized for taking up space, and she wasn't about to start now. He quickly recovered, his arrogance reasserting itself. Let's just say that our first-class cabin has a certain ambiance, and your ensemble is a bit of a disruption. A disruption? Imani repeated, her voice dangerously soft. Captain, the only disruption I see here is your unprofessional and frankly insulting behavior. I suggest you return to the cockpit and focus on what you're paid to do. Fly this plane safely to its destination. A flash of anger crossed Captain Sampson's face. He was not used to being challenged, especially not by a passenger. Now see here, he began, his voice rising. I am the captain of this aircraft, and I will not be spoken to in that tone. And I am a paying passenger in a premium cabin who expects to be treated with a modicum of respect. Imani countered, her gaze unwavering. A courtesy that you seem to be utterly incapable of extending. The tension in the small cabin was palpable. The other first-class passengers, a mix of business executives and wealthy tourists, were now openly staring, their conversations forgotten. The flight attendant stood frozen, unsure of how to intervene. Captain Sampson, realizing he was losing control of the situation, decided to double down on his cruelty. He let out a short, humorless laugh. Respect is earned, madam, and frankly, I'm not sure what someone dressed like you has done to earn it. He then turned on his heel and strode back to the cockpit, leaving a stunned silence in his wake. Imani sat back in her seat, her heart pounding with a mixture of anger and disbelief. She had faced racism and sexism throughout her career, but the sheer audacity of Captain Sampson's prejudice was breathtaking. It was a raw, unfiltered bigotry that he had felt comfortable displaying in front of a cabin full of witnesses. As the plane began to taxi to the runway, a senior flight attendant, a kind-faced woman named Margaret, approached Imani's seat. "Reed," she said, her voice filled with genuine concern. "I am so sorry for the captain's behavior. It was completely unacceptable." Imani appreciated the woman's empathy, but she knew that an apology from a flight attendant was not enough. This was not a simple case of a rude employee. This was a symptom of a much deeper problem within the airline. A culture that allowed a man like Captain Sampson to feel so secure in his prejudice that he could openly mock a passenger without fear of reprisal. And Imani Reed was not a woman who let such things go unanswered. As the plane ascended into the clouds, she opened her briefcase and took out her phone. She had a few calls to make, and when she was done, Captain Mark Sampson, and indeed the entire board of Apex Air, would learn a lesson they would never forget. The flight across the Atlantic was, for Imani, an exercise in controlled fury. The luxurious first-class pod, which should have been a sanctuary of comfort, now felt like a gilded cage. Every perk. The gourmet meal she barely touched, the vintage Dom Perignon that remained unopened, the lie-flat bed she couldn't bring herself to use, was a bitter reminder of the disrespect she had endured. The condescending smirk of Captain Sampson was seared into her memory, a stark symbol of the arrogance and prejudice that still festered in the highest echelons of society. She spent the first hour of the flight composing a series of emails. Her fingers flew across the keyboard of her phone, her words precise and powerful. The first was to her personal assistant, a fiercely loyal and efficient young woman named Chloe. The instructions were clear. Cancel her scheduled engagements in London for the next 2 days and clear her calendar for a series of impromptu meetings. She also asked Chloe to compile a comprehensive dossier on Captain Mark Sampson, including his employment history, any prior disciplinary actions, and his social media presence. The second email was to the lead counsel of her firm, a man named Benjamin Carter, known for his sharp legal mind and his unwavering commitment to justice. She detailed the incident with Captain Sampson, making sure to include every insulting word, every dismissive gesture. She instructed him to begin preparing a formal complaint against Apex Air, one that would not only seek damages for the emotional distress caused, but also demand a thorough investigation into the airline's hiring and training practices. She also asked him to discreetly reach out to a few trusted contacts in the aviation industry to gauge if this was an isolated incident or part of a larger pattern of behavior at Apex Air. The third and final email was the most significant. It was addressed to a single individual, Mr. Thomas Wellington, the chairman of the board of Apex Air. Imani had known Thomas for years. They moved in the same rarefied circles of wealth and power. They had served on charitable boards together and had attended the same exclusive galas. But this email was not from a friend. It was from the single largest individual shareholder in his company. Imani had started investing in Apex Air 5 years ago, not out of a passion for aviation, but because she saw an undervalued asset with immense potential. Through a series of shrewd and aggressive acquisitions, she had quietly amassed a controlling interest in the airline. Her stake was held through a series of shell corporations and investment vehicles, a deliberate strategy to keep her involvement under the radar. She preferred to exert her influence from the shadows, a silent partner who guided the company's direction without ever setting foot in the boardroom. Until now. Her email to Thomas was brief and to the point. It simply stated that there had been a serious incident on her flight, and that she expected to meet with him and the entire board of directors upon her arrival in London. She did not elaborate on the nature of the incident. She knew that the vagueness of her message, combined with the unprecedented nature of her request, would be enough to send a shockwave through the highest levels of Apex Air's management. As the plane cruised at 35,000 feet, Imani tried to distract herself by reviewing some financial reports, but her mind kept replaying the scene in the cabin. The other passengers, the ones Captain Sampson had deemed to be appropriately subdued, had all averted their gazes. Not a single one had spoken up in her defense. Their silence was a form of complicity, a quiet endorsement of the pilot's prejudice. It was a stark reminder that the fight for equality was far from over, and that it was often fought in the most unexpected of places. Meanwhile, in the cockpit, Captain Sampson was regaling his co-pilot, David, with a self-congratulatory account of his encounter with Imani. "Can you believe the nerve of her?" he scoffed, his voice filled with a smug satisfaction. "Coming on my plane dressed like a damn circus clown and then trying to lecture me on professionalism. I put her in her place, all right." David, who had been visibly uncomfortable during the confrontation, remained silent. He was a young pilot, still trying to make a name for himself in the competitive world of aviation. He knew that challenging a senior captain like Mark Sampson could be career suicide. But he also knew that what he had witnessed was wrong. He had seen the quiet dignity in Reed's eyes and the ugly prejudice in his captain's. The memory of it left a bitter taste in his mouth. As they began their descent into London Heathrow, the flight attendants prepared the cabin for landing. Margaret, the senior flight attendant who had apologized to Imani, approached her again. "Reed," she said in a low voice, "I've filed a formal report about the captain's conduct. I've also spoken to the other members of the cabin crew, and they are all willing to provide a statement." Imani was touched by her courage. "Thank you, Margaret. That means a great deal to me." "It's the least I can do," Margaret replied. "I've been with this airline for 20 years, and I've never seen a passenger treated with such disrespect. It's a disgrace to the uniform." When the plane finally landed and taxied to the gate, Captain Sampson's voice came over the intercom, his tone as smooth and polished as ever. "On behalf of Apex Air, I'd like to thank you for flying with us today. We hope you have a pleasant stay in London." For Imani, the words were a final, galling insult. He had spoken of Apex Air as if he were its sole representative, its gatekeeper. He had no idea that the woman he had so casually dismissed was, in fact, his ultimate boss, and she was about to make him painfully aware of that fact. As she disembarked from the plane, Imani saw a man in a tailored suit holding a sign with her name on it. He was from the airline's VIP services, sent to escort her through customs and immigration. The airline had no idea of the storm that was about to break. They thought they were simply providing their usual premium service to a high-value customer. They had no idea they were about to face a reckoning. The meeting was set for the following morning in the opulent boardroom of Apex Air's London headquarters. The room was a monument to corporate power, with a long, polished mahogany table, plush leather chairs, and panoramic views of the city skyline. At the head of the table sat Thomas Wellington, the chairman of the board, a man whose silver hair and bespoke suit exuded an air of old money authority. He was flanked by the other members of the board, a collection of seasoned executives and industry titans, all of them looking tense and bewildered. They had all received Imani's cryptic email, and the speculation had been running rampant ever since. Who was this mysterious Imani Reed, and what could have possibly happened on her flight to warrant such an extraordinary demand? They had checked her name in their records, and all they could find was that she was a frequent first-class passenger with a high-value loyalty account. There was no indication of her true significance to the company. At precisely 10 a.m., the boardroom doors opened and Imani Reed walked in. She was dressed in a chic navy blue power suit, her demeanor calm and composed. She was followed by her lawyer, Benjamin Carter, a man whose sharp, intelligent eyes seemed to take in every detail of the room. Thomas Wellington rose to his feet, a practiced, diplomatic smile on his face. "Reed," he began, extending his hand. "Welcome to Apex Air. I'm Thomas Wellington. We spoke on the phone yesterday. I must say your email caused quite a stir." Imani ignored his outstretched hand and took a seat at the opposite end of the table, her gaze sweeping over the assembled board members. "Mr. Wellington," she said, her voice cool and even, "I am not here for pleasantries. I am here because of a deeply disturbing incident that occurred on one of your flights yesterday, an incident that I believe is indicative of a systemic problem within your organization." A murmur went through the room. The board members exchanged uneasy glances. They had been expecting a complaint, perhaps about a lost piece of luggage or a subpar meal. They were not prepared for this. Thomas cleared his throat, his smile faltering slightly. "I assure you, Reed, we take all customer complaints very seriously. We have already launched a full investigation into the matter. In fact, we have the pilot in question, Captain Sampson, waiting outside. We thought it would be best for him to apologize to you in person." Imani raised an eyebrow. "You thought it would be best?" she repeated, her voice laced with incredulity. "You thought that a perfunctory, coerced apology would be sufficient to address an act of blatant racism and misogyny? That is a profound miscalculation, Mr. Wellington." The use of the words racism and misogyny hung in the air like a thick, suffocating smoke. The board members shifted uncomfortably in their seats. This was far more serious than they had anticipated. Before Thomas could respond, the boardroom doors opened again, and Captain Mark Sampson was ushered in by a junior executive. He had been coached by the airline's HR department on what to say, how to appear contrite and remorseful. He had been told that his job was on the line, and that he needed to do whatever it took to appease this wealthy and apparently influential passenger. He approached Imani, his face a mask of feigned humility. "Reed," he began, his voice dripping with insincerity, "I want to offer you my sincerest apologies for my behavior yesterday. There is no excuse for my words, and I deeply regret any offense I may have caused." Imani listened to his rehearsed speech without interruption, her expression unreadable. When he had finished, she remained silent for a long moment, letting the emptiness of his words hang in the air. Then she spoke, her voice quiet but carrying an undeniable weight of authority. "Captain Sampson," she said, her eyes boring into his, "do you know who I am?" The question seemed to confuse him. "You're Reed," he stammered. "The passenger from yesterday." "That's right," Imani said. "I am Imani Reed. I am also the founder and CEO of a multi-billion-dollar venture capital firm. I am a woman who has shattered glass ceilings and defied expectations my entire life. and I am a black woman who has had to fight for every ounce of respect that I have ever received." She paused, letting her words sink in. The board members were now listening with rapt attention, a dawning sense of dread on their faces. "When you looked at me yesterday, Captain," Imani continued, her voice rising with a controlled passion, "you didn't see any of that. You saw a black woman in a bright yellow suit, and you made a judgment. You decided that I didn't belong in your precious first-class cabin. You decided that I was worthy of your scorn, your ridicule." Captain Sampson began to protest, but Imani cut him off with a sharp wave of her hand. "Don't insult my intelligence by pretending that your comments were anything other than what they were, a manifestation of your own deep-seated prejudice. You felt entitled to mock me, to belittle me, because you assumed that I was powerless, that I was just another faceless passenger you could intimidate into silence." She then turned her attention back to the board. "And you," she said, her voice dripping with contempt, "you thought you could solve this problem with a staged apology and a slap on the wrist. You thought you could protect your brand by sweeping this under the rug. You have no idea of the magnitude of the mistake you have all made." Thomas Wellington finally found his voice. "Reed," he said, his tone now pleading, "we are truly sorry for what happened. We are prepared to offer you a full refund for your flight, as well as a substantial amount of travel vouchers for any future flights with us. We are also prepared to suspend Captain Sampson without pay and require him to attend mandatory sensitivity training." Imani let out a short, humorless laugh. "Travel vouchers?" she repeated, as if the words themselves were an insult. "You think you can buy my forgiveness with a few free flights? You still don't get it, do you?" She rose to her feet, her presence seeming to fill the entire room. "I don't want your vouchers, Mr. Wellington. I don't want your hollow apologies. I want real change. I want accountability. And I am in a position to demand it." It was then that her lawyer, Benjamin Carter, stepped forward and placed a thick file on the table. "Gentlemen," he said, his voice calm and professional, "my client, Imani Reed, is the beneficial owner of just over 15% of the voting shares of Apex Air. She is, for all intents and purposes, your largest single shareholder." The bombshell exploded in the silent boardroom. The color drained from Thomas Wellington's face. The other board members stared at Imani in stunned disbelief. Captain Sampson looked as if he had seen a ghost. Imani smiled, a cold, triumphant smile. "That's right, gentlemen," she said, her voice as sharp as a diamond. "I own a very significant piece of this airline, and as the person who signs your checks, I am here to inform you that your days of tolerating this kind of behavior are over. We are going to have a long and very detailed conversation about the future of this company, and I can assure you there are going to be some changes around here." The hard karma had just begun to hit, and for Captain Mark Sampson and the entire board of Apex Air, the day of reckoning had finally arrived. The revelation of Imani Reed's identity as the airline's largest shareholder sent a tidal wave of panic through the boardroom. The carefully constructed facade of corporate control had been shattered, and the men who had once held all the power were now scrambling to salvage their careers. The ill-conceived apology had backfired spectacularly, exposing their ignorance and their deep-seated biases. Captain Mark Sampson stood frozen, his face a pale mask of horror. The woman he had so casually mocked, the woman he had deemed unworthy of his respect, was his ultimate boss. The sheer, unadulterated arrogance that had been his defining characteristic had now become the architect of his downfall. He felt a cold dread seep into his bones, a chilling premonition of the consequences that were about to befall him. Imani, now firmly in control of the room, wasted no time in asserting her authority. "Mr. Wellington," she began, her voice cutting through the stunned silence, "you are the chairman of this board. The culture of this company, for better or for worse, starts with you. And what I have witnessed is a culture of complacency, a culture that allows prejudice to fester and grow unchecked. That ends today." Thomas Wellington, a man who was used to commanding respect and deference, found himself utterly powerless. He could only nod, his face ashen. Reed, he stammered. We had no idea. We will do whatever it takes to make this right. Making it right is not about a single incident, Thomas, Imani corrected him, using his first name to underscore the shift in power. It's about a fundamental transformation of this airline's values. It's about creating an environment where every single passenger and every single employee is treated with dignity and respect, regardless of their race, their gender, or their background. She then turned her attention back to the disgraced pilot. Captain Sampson, she said, her voice devoid of any emotion. Your employment with Apex Air is terminated, effective immediately. You will be escorted from the premises and you will not be entitled to any severance package. Your actions were a gross violation of this company's code of conduct and a profound embarrassment to this airline. You are a liability, and I have no tolerance for liabilities in my portfolio. Sampson's face crumpled. You can't do that, he pleaded, his voice cracking. I've been with this airline for 25 years. I have a family, a mortgage. You should have thought about your family and your mortgage before you decided to indulge your bigotry at 35,000 feet, Imani retorted, her voice as cold as ice. You are a man who has been given a position of immense responsibility, and you have abused it in the most despicable way. You are a disgrace to the uniform you wear, and you will never fly for this airline, or any other airline that I have any influence over, ever again. Security was called, and a stunned and broken Mark Sampson was escorted from the boardroom, his career in aviation over in the blink of an eye. The other board members watched his departure in grim silence, the reality of their new situation slowly sinking in. But Imani was far from finished. She then addressed the rest of the board, her gaze sweeping over each of them. As for the rest of you, she said, her voice a low, dangerous growl, your positions are not as secure as you might think. I will be conducting a thorough review of this company's leadership from the top down. I will be looking for a new CEO, someone who shares my vision for a truly inclusive and equitable airline. And I will be reconstituting this board with individuals who are committed to real, meaningful change. She paused, letting the weight of her words settle in the room. This is not a threat, she continued. It is a promise. Apex Air will become a model of corporate responsibility, a company that is not only profitable but also a force for good in the world. And if any of you are not on board with that vision, I suggest you tender your resignations now. The boardroom was silent, the only sound the faint hum of the air conditioning. The men who had walked into that room that morning feeling secure in their power were now facing a future of uncertainty. Their world had been turned upside down by a woman they had never even heard of, a woman who had quietly and strategically positioned herself to take control of their company. In the days and weeks that followed, Imani made good on her promises. She initiated a company-wide audit of diversity and inclusion practices. She hired a top consulting firm to overhaul the airline's training programs, with a new emphasis on unconscious bias and cultural sensitivity. She established a scholarship fund for aspiring pilots and aviation professionals from underrepresented backgrounds. The news of Captain Sampson's firing and the subsequent shakeup at Apex Air sent shockwaves through the aviation industry. The story was picked up by major news outlets, and the audio recording from the flight attendant's report was leaked to the media. The public outcry was immense, and Apex Air stock took a temporary hit. But Imani, a seasoned investor, was not deterred. She knew that true change often came at a cost, and she was willing to pay the price. She held a press conference, her first public appearance as the new face of Apex Air. She spoke with eloquence and passion about her vision for the airline, her voice resonating with a sincerity that was impossible to fake. She didn't just talk about corporate responsibility, she embodied it. She met with community leaders and civil rights organizations, forging partnerships to create a more equitable and just society. She became a vocal advocate for diversity in the corporate world, using her platform to inspire a new generation of leaders. And as for Mark Sampson, his life unraveled with a brutal and karmic efficiency. He was not only fired from his job, but he was also stripped of his pilot's license. The story of his racist and misogynistic behavior made him a pariah in the aviation community. No other airline would touch him. He was forced to sell his home, his marriage fell apart, and he found himself working a menial job, a bitter and broken man, haunted by the memory of his own arrogance. The hard karma had hit him, not with a single dramatic blow, but with a slow, grinding inevitability. He had sown the seeds of his own destruction, and he was now reaping the bitter harvest. And in a final, ironic twist, he would often see the new face of Apex Air, Imani Reed, on the news, her star continuing to rise as his own had been so spectacularly extinguished. He had judged a book by its cover, and in doing so, he had written the final, tragic chapter of his own story. The changes at Apex Air were not merely cosmetic. They were foundational, a seismic shift in the company's very DNA. Under Imani Reed's leadership, the airline underwent a radical transformation, one that was felt from the boardroom to the baggage claim. The ripple effect of that fateful flight from New York to London spread far and wide, touching the lives of employees, passengers, and even the broader aviation industry. Imani's first order of business was to install a new CEO, a dynamic and forward-thinking woman named Isabella Rossi, who had a proven track record of leading with both compassion and a sharp business acumen. Together they embarked on a mission to rebuild Apex Air from the inside out. They established a new set of corporate values, with diversity, equity, and inclusion at their core. These weren't just buzzwords to be printed on glossy brochures. They were guiding principles that were woven into every aspect of the company's operations. A new independent ombudsman's office was created, providing a safe and confidential channel for employees and passengers to report any instances of discrimination or harassment. The apathetic response Imani had initially received was a thing of the past. Now, every complaint was taken seriously, investigated thoroughly, and dealt with decisively. The impact on the company culture was profound. The climate of fear and complicity that had allowed a man like Mark Sampson to thrive was replaced by one of openness and accountability. Employees were encouraged to speak up, to challenge prejudice wherever they saw it. The flight attendant, Margaret, who had courageously reported Captain Sampson's behavior, was promoted to a senior management position, a clear signal that integrity and courage would be rewarded. The changes were also visible to the passengers. The airline's marketing campaigns were overhauled, featuring a diverse range of faces and stories. The in-flight entertainment options were expanded to include a wider selection of films, music, and documentaries from around the world. Even the food and beverage service was revamped, with menus that celebrated a variety of culinary traditions. But perhaps the most significant change was the establishment of the Apex Air Foundation for a more inclusive world. Imani personally endowed the foundation with a substantial portion of her own wealth, and it quickly became a major force for social change. The foundation provided scholarships and grants to students from marginalized communities who were pursuing careers in STEM, business, and the arts. It also partnered with non-profit organizations that were working to combat systemic inequality and promote social justice. The story of Imani Reed and Apex Air became a case study in corporate responsibility, a powerful example of how one individual's courage and conviction could spark a movement for change. Imani was invited to speak at conferences and forums around the world, her story inspiring countless others to challenge the status quo and demand a more just and equitable world. And what of the other players in this real-life drama? Thomas Wellington, the former chairman of the board, was forced into a quiet and ignominious retirement. The other board members who had sat in silence during that fateful meeting were gradually replaced by a new, more diverse group of leaders who shared Imani's vision. The co-pilot, David, who had been a silent witness to Captain Sampson's tirade, was deeply affected by the experience. He reached out to Imani personally, expressing his regret for not speaking up in the moment. Imani, recognizing his genuine remorse and his potential for growth, took him under her wing. She mentored him, encouraging him to use his voice and his position to advocate for change within the airline. David went on to become a leader in the pilots' union, a passionate champion for a more inclusive and respectful workplace. Even the other first-class passengers on that flight were not immune to the ripple effect. The story of what had happened became a topic of conversation in their own circles, forcing them to confront their own complicity in the face of injustice. Some were shamed into a new awareness, while others remained entrenched in their prejudices. But none could deny the power of the story, the undeniable truth that a single act of courage could expose the ugliness of bigotry and inspire a movement for change. The airline industry as a whole was also forced to take a hard look at itself. Other airlines, fearing a similar public relations disaster, began to review their own diversity and inclusion policies. The story of Apex Air became a cautionary tale, a reminder that in the age of social media and heightened social consciousness, no company was immune to the consequences of its actions. And at the center of it all was Imani Reed, a woman who had turned a moment of personal humiliation into a catalyst for profound and lasting change. She had not sought the spotlight, but she had not shied away from it when it was thrust upon her. She had used her power not for personal gain, but for the betterment of society. She had shown the world that one person, armed with courage, conviction, and a significant shareholding, could indeed move mountains. And in doing so, she had rewritten not only the story of Apex Air, but also her own, transforming a tale of prejudice and disrespect into an enduring legacy of hope and inspiration. The years that followed did not simply pass. They meticulously rebuilt. The story of the pilot, the pantsuit, and the shareholder who brought an airline to its knees became a modern corporate fable, a cautionary tale whispered in the hallowed halls of Harvard Business School, and a viral source of inspiration shared across the digital world. But for those within Apex Air, it was not a fable. It was the genesis of their new reality, a lived experience of profound and continuous transformation. The airline that emerged from the ashes of that public humiliation was not merely rebranded, it was reborn, its very soul re-engineered under the watchful, unwavering gaze of Dr. Imani Reed. Apex Air became a case study in conscious capitalism. Under the dynamic leadership of CEO Isabella Rossi, with Imani as the board's unshakable moral compass, the airline's stock not only recovered, but soared to unprecedented heights. Profitability was no longer pursued as a singular goal, but as a natural byproduct of a culture built on a radical new premise, that the dignity of every individual, employee, and passenger alike was the company's most valuable asset. The change was palpable. It was in the easy camaraderie between a senior pilot from Dublin and his young Sikh co-pilot, discussing flight plans over coffee in a briefing room that was once a hotbed of locker room machismo. It was in the story of a maintenance crew chief in Atlanta, a man of Filipino descent named Ramon, who, emboldened by the new anonymous reporting system Imani had championed, flagged a persistent hydraulic fluid leak that had been previously dismissed by his supervisor. His courage, which would have once marked him as a troublemaker, was now publicly celebrated, and the investigation he triggered uncovered a systemic manufacturing flaw, preventing a catastrophe that could have cost hundreds of lives. Ramon was not just rewarded with a bonus. He was promoted to a regional safety oversight position, his story becoming a cornerstone of the new training modules. The transformation was also felt by Margaret, the senior flight attendant who had been the first to stand by Imani. Imani had not forgotten her courage. Margaret was now the vice president of in-flight experience, a position created specifically for her. She didn't just design new cabin interiors or approve catering menus. She mentored the next generation of flight crews, instilling in them the core values that had reshaped the airline. She would often tell new recruits the story of that flight, not to gossip about a fallen captain, but to illustrate a fundamental truth. Your uniform, she would say, her voice filled with quiet conviction, doesn't just represent this airline. It represents a promise of safety, of service, and of unwavering respect for every single person who steps onto our aircraft. It is a promise we never, ever break. Imani, for her part, navigated the unfamiliar terrain of public life. A woman who had masterfully wielded power from the shadows was now an icon. She was featured on magazine covers, her name synonymous with corporate integrity. She found the fame disquieting, a distraction from the real work. She would sit in her study late at night, surrounded by financial reports and philanthropic proposals, and grapple with the irony of her situation. She had fought for the right to be seen as more than her appearance, only to have her face become a symbol. Yet she accepted this new role with the same pragmatism and steely resolve that had defined her entire life. It was a tool, and she would use it to its fullest potential. Her true passion project, the Apex Air Foundation for a More Inclusive World, became her life's defining work. This was no mere exercise in corporate social responsibility, no tax write-off disguised as charity. It was a strategic weapon against the very systems that had produced men like Mark Sampson. Imani personally reviewed the applications for the Foundation's premier scholarship, the Wings of Change grant. She would look at the faces of the applicants, a young woman from a Detroit housing project who dreamed of aerospace engineering, a transgender teen from rural Texas who wanted to become a data scientist, a recent refugee from Syria with a gift for logistics, and she would see the future. She was not just giving them money, she was clearing the runway for them, removing the obstacles that had been placed in their paths by a world that had judged them before they even had a chance to prove themselves. And what of the man who had been the catalyst for this revolution? Mark Sampson's downfall was not a sudden, dramatic crash, but a slow, grinding descent into a personal hell of his own making. The hard karma that found him was cruelly, poetically just. He was unemployable in the aviation world, a pariah whose name was a byword for professional suicide. The generous salary, the adulation that came with the captain's uniform, the beautiful home in the suburbs, it all vanished, repossessed by the life he had torched with his own arrogance. He found work as a night dispatcher for a regional trucking company, a job he performed from a cramped, fluorescent-lit office that smelled of stale coffee and regret. He would sit there, surrounded by the crackle of radios and the mundane logistics of freight, a ghost haunting the graveyard shift of his own life. The most exquisite torture came from the small television mounted in the corner of the office. It was often tuned to a 24-hour news channel, and he would be forced to watch reports of Apex Air's latest triumphs, its record-breaking profits, its innovative green initiatives, its glowing passenger reviews. He would see Imani Reed accepting an award, or Isabella Rossi ringing the opening bell at the stock exchange, and a venomous, impotent rage would consume him. In his mind, he was the victim. He had been cancelled by a world gone soft, destroyed by a woman who couldn't take a joke. He never once in the hollow echo chamber of his bitterness considered that he was the author of his own misery. The prejudice that had cost him everything was the one thing he refused to let go. The most profound karma, however, was delivered not by a corporation or the faceless public, but by his own daughter, Emily. She was a bright, empathetic young woman who had watched her father's slow moral decay with a growing sense of horror. After he was fired, she had tried to reach him, to talk to him, to understand. She found him not remorseful, but resentful. She tried one last time, meeting him at a greasy spoon diner that stood as a sad monument to his new station in life. "Dad," she had pleaded, her voice trembling, "don't you see what you did? It wasn't about the suit. It was about what you saw when you looked at her. It was about hate." Mark had sneered into his coffee. "Hate is a strong word. I just have a sense of humor, something her kind doesn't understand." That was the moment the last thread of filial devotion snapped. Emily stood up, her eyes filled with a sad finality. "Her kind? Dad, her kind is a human being who deserved your respect, and my kind is someone who can't have a person like you in my life. Not anymore." She walked out of the diner and out of his life, leaving him alone with his prejudice, a bill he would continue to pay for the rest of his days. In a final, heartbreaking act of defiance and redemption, Emily changed her last name and, years later, became a pro bono lawyer for an immigrant rights organization, her life's work a silent, powerful rebuke of her father's legacy. Years later, an 80-year-old Imani Reed, her steps slower but her mind as sharp as ever, was on a flight to London. She was to receive an honorary doctorate from the London School of Economics, a final, glittering accolade in a life filled with them. As she settled into her first-class pod on the new Apex Air Starlight liner, a marvel of engineering and design she had personally signed off on, she noticed the seamless efficiency of the crew. It was a quiet ballet of professionalism and genuine warmth, the living embodiment of the culture she had fought so hard to build. Just after the doors were secured, a figure emerged from the cockpit. It was the captain, a tall, poised black woman with intelligent eyes that held a spark of deep admiration. She walked directly to Imani's seat and knelt, an act of respect that was both professional and deeply personal. "Dr. Reed," the pilot began, her voice clear and steady, yet tinged with emotion. "My name is Captain Imani Jones. I hope I'm not disturbing you, but I had to come and speak to you." Imani smiled graciously. "Not at all, Captain. It's a pleasure to meet you." "The pleasure is all mine," Imani insisted. "You see, I wouldn't be here if it weren't for you. I don't just mean that you're an inspiration. I mean it literally. I was 15 living in a small apartment in Inglewood when your story broke. I read about you, about what you did. A week later, my school counselor told me about a new scholarship, the Wings of Change grant from the Apex Foundation. I applied. I wrote my essay about you, about how you made me believe that the sky wasn't the limit, it was a destination. Dr. Reed, I was in the very first class of your scholarship recipients." Imani stared at the young woman, and the carefully constructed composure she had maintained for decades began to crumble. This was it. This was the culmination. It wasn't the stock price, the awards, or the magazine covers. It was this. It was the face of the future she had invested in, standing before her in the crisp, authoritative uniform of a captain. It was the living, breathing proof that you could take something ugly and hateful, and from it, cultivate something beautiful and strong. Tears, hot and unexpected, welled in Imani's eyes. The memory of Samson's sneer, the sting of his words, the cold fury that had propelled her forward. It all coalesced in this one perfect, breathtaking moment of victory. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, and placed it on the captain's arm. Her voice, when she spoke, was thick with a lifetime of emotion. "No, Captain Jones," she whispered. "Thank you." As Captain Imani Jones returned to the cockpit to guide the magnificent aircraft into the heavens, Imani leaned back in her seat. She looked out the window at the sprawling city lights below, a glittering tapestry of human endeavor. The sun-kissed yellow suit she had worn that day, so long ago, had been a statement. It was a beacon of defiance in a world that demanded she be subdued. And now, she realized, its light had never gone out. It had simply been passed on, a torch of hope held high in the hands of a new generation, illuminating a path to a brighter, more just horizon. The sky was indeed the destination, and her legacy was finally, beautifully, airborne. Imani Reed's story is a powerful reminder that respect is not a privilege to be earned, but a right to be given. It's a testament to the fact that one person's courage can ignite a revolution of change, transforming a moment of deep personal injustice into a legacy that can inspire generations. The hard karma that befell Captain Samson wasn't just about one man's downfall. It was about the triumph of decency and the dismantling of a toxic culture. Her story proves that real power isn't about the uniform you wear or the title you hold. It's about the strength of your character and your unwavering commitment to what is right. If this story resonated with you, if you believe in the power of standing up to injustice, then please like this video, share it with your friends and family, and subscribe to our channel for more real-life dramas that will both shock and inspire you. Let's keep the conversation going and continue to champion a world where everyone is treated with the dignity they deserve.